And earlier, leaders of the G20 attended the first session to discuss issues concerning social inclusion. The bloc also launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for building a just world of common development in his speech at the first session. He also announced China's 8 action plans to support global development.
And on the sidelines of the summit, President Xi has met with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. The leaders are expected to attend a second session focusing on the reform of international institutions. We'll bring you the latest from Rio as the afternoon meetings get underway.
All right, now we are joined here in our studio for some analysis on the main agenda at this year's G20. And we have with us Professor Liu Baocheng. He's Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. And also Vasilis Trikas, visiting Assistant Professor of Global Affairs of Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University. Great to have you both on our program.
Great to be here.
So certainly a lot of issues on this year's agenda in Rio, for example, the climate change, the fight against hunger and poverty, the reform of global institutions. What are some of the items topping your list of concern, Professor Liu?
Well, for me, poverty reduction is really something that addresses. I always believe that poverty is a source for all evils. Be it drug trafficking, be it social riots, be it terrorist attacks, etc. So to provide people with the right type of living standard is really the effort of the entire human race. So for that, China has really done a remarkable job in elevating the over 800 million people out of extreme poverty with its concerted efforts by different generations of Chinese leadership and support by the Chinese business communities, etc. So I think now to address such an issue is also on the top agenda of the United Nations in terms of their sustainable development goals, because there's the time is getting very pressing for such a realization, and many of those Latin American countries and African countries who are members of such platform are really also taking a lot of the good showcases from China as how to manage that. And besides, to address the poverty alleviation, you need more of an institutional architecture to preserve the fruition of such sort of efforts, so that people can really live on a sustainable basis of their living standard, and also to keep the business running for continued generation of the wealth.
Professor Trikas, it is clear that Brazil is utilizing this platform of G20 to highlight, to shed light on an issue that is very close to the heart of Brazil, poverty. And it's very much in line with Brazil advocating to elevate the voices of the global South. How can G20 as a platform tackle this issue together?
Well, I think, the G20 was created because the old world, the world of the G7, was not sufficient to resolve global problems. And so, in fact, it was realized that during the Great Recession in 2008, the only way for the world to avoid a deep economic downturn was to bring in together the G7 countries and the global South, China, Brazil, India, and this is exactly what happened. So in London in 2008, the finance ministers came together. The G20 became the new vehicle to promote global stability and resolve the global financial crisis. Had this not happened, not only poverty alleviation would not be a process, but the deep economic downturn of the global recession, the Great Recession, would have taken people from the middle class back into the poverty trap. So we do have the empirical record to demonstrate that the only way to resolve issues today in today's world is to reconcile the gap between the global South and the global North, and the G20 serves as the best platform of governance to engage with the two different development levels of the global South and the global North.
And also, in addition to it, actually, the G7 was born as the legacy of the Bretton Woods agreement that addresses financial stability gradually. When there was G8, and then G20, and now it's getting more and more inclusive. It also shows actually the evolving global landscape in terms of the governance and management over global issues. So starting from the treasury meetings and the finance ministers meetings, and now it's elevated to the top leaders summit. So this is really a changing by elevating more of the voice from the developing world, particularly from the global south, and with the big emerging economies are really getting more and more representative and showing also on the concern of their domestic issues that needs to be addressed through the cooperation between global south and also global north.
And now, as we're discussing here, live pictures from Rio de Janeiro, this year's G20 Summit. You're watching leaders of the G20 nations posing for a group photo at the event's venue, the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
It does look like all the leaders are in very high spirits there, coming out of the first session focusing on poverty reduction and fighting hunger. And 19 member countries plus the European Union and African Union are represented at the summit this time. Professor Liu, you were talking about the Bretton Woods and the global order after that, but it is exactly the international institutions established after Bretton Woods. We're talking about the IMF and the World Bank, that the Global South is advocating for change.
Yeah, and now also the new BRICS Bank or New Development Bank and the AIIB, so all of them are really coming up as more of the financial facilities that are either involving the participation or even the leadership of those emerging economies representing the interests of the global south.
Sure. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your analysis. Now let's check in the latest with our reporter, Ule. He's been following the development from Rio very closely. Good to see you there, Ule. So G20 leaders agreed to launch this alliance against poverty and hunger on the very first day, the opening of the summit. Tell us more about today's discussions surrounding this very important topic.
Indeed, Mamang, along with hundreds of global journalists, we have been at this International Media Center and following the first session of this G20 Leaders Summit very closely. And this early morning, President Lula of Brazil has announced the official launch of this global alliance against poverty and hunger. And also President Xi Jinping also delivered a keynote speech focusing on China's stance about the support about the global alliance against hunger and poverty. And we talked with many global journalists and had received many positive feedback about the China's proposals. And for example, I talked to the chief editor or editor-in-chief of Saudi Arabia Financial Times newspaper, and he mentioned that he was really impressed by Chinese President Xi Jinping's proposals of 8 action plans, which include financial support to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also the strong support, more funding about the Belt and Road and the Silk Road Fund, and also strong support to Africa. And also he mentioned about China's story about the poverty alleviation is a proof that developing countries can also eliminate the poverty. If China can do it, other developing countries can do it too. And also China proposed 8 stunts about these initiatives, for example, pursuing high-quality Belt Road cooperation, and China announced additional 80 billion yuan RMB injection into the Silk Road Fund, and also implementing the Global Development Initiative on the basis of over 1,100 development projects already in operation. They will make sure the Global South Research Center is being built, is fit for the purpose, and another 20 billion US dollars of development funds will continue to put good in use of the support developing countries. So we can see there are a lot of positive feedback from the global journalists on the proposal from the Chinese president. And later this afternoon, after the family photo of the G20 leaders, and the session 2 will be focusing on the global governance reform. As we know that there are a lot of global institutions like the global bank and also other World Trade Organization and also United Nations Security Council, and it is time to reform these multilateral institutions, and especially for the benefit of global South. And we know this time, African Union, it is the first time for them to participate in this Global Leaders Summit, and the voice of global South has yet to be heard, and it is time to continue to reform these multilateral institutions, and especially to add more multilateral banks like the Asia Infrastructure Banks and also new development banks. So this afternoon we'll be focusing on this reform of these global institutions. And tomorrow morning we'll be focusing on the new energy transition and sustainable and green development. The global leaders will talk about the issues on sustainable and green development. And after the G20 meeting, President Xi will travel to Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil, and pay a state visit there. And we will keep following these latest events about the G20 and also the state visit, and we will keep you updated. Back to you.
Wu-Lei, thank you so much for that update from Rio, from outside the venue of the G20 Summit.
And now here's a look at what's been happening on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit. He said as permanent members of the UN Security Council and major economies in the world, China and the UK must shoulder the task of promoting their respective national development and also bear the responsibility of addressing global challenges. President Xi also stressed that the two countries have a large potential for cooperation in trade, investment, clean energy, financial services, medical care, and people's livelihood. He said the two sides should promote political settlement of hotspot issues, strengthen global governance of artificial intelligence, and contribute to promoting world economic growth and achieving common development of countries. Prime Minister Starmer said Britain and China share common interests and shoulder the responsibility for solving global challenges and maintaining world peace and development. He also said the two countries adhere to multilateralism.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has also met with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. President Xi said there is no fundamental conflict of interest between China and Australia. He also expressed his willingness to work with Australia to improve the two countries' comprehensive strategic partnership and bring more stability to the region. Xi also said China will import more high-quality Australian products and encourage Chinese enterprises to invest in Australia. Prime Minister Albanese said Australia does not want to decouple from China and that he's willing to strengthen cooperation with China in areas such as energy transformation and climate change. The Prime Minister added that Australia supports China as the 2026 APEC host. Albanese said Australia will work with China to strengthen multilateral communication and promote regional peace, stability, and prosperity.
Now let's also check in with CGTN correspondent Joel Richards, also live in Rio for us this hour. Joel, the Leaders Summit had a strong opening with a session focusing on fighting poverty and hunger. What more can you tell us about the items on the agenda next?
Yeah, well, good afternoon. Well, there's a bit of a hush at the International Media Centre, as you said. As we've had the leaders, the family photo with the leaders, all here in Rio for this G20 Leaders Summit. And as you mentioned this morning, the focus was very much on the agenda that the hosts, Brazil, have looked to put on the table with what Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, the Brazil president, said was the most important legacy that this year's summit could have, and that is a global commitment to combat hunger and poverty, and that is exactly what has been achieved. There were questions going into this summit whether or not a couple of the countries, including Argentina, would sign this and become members of this global alliance. In the end, that has happened, despite what some of the suggestions in reports previously. So that is very much a victory for Brazil and for the G20 and for this summit to move forward with that global alliance. Coming up after the family photo, then there's a further session this afternoon. That's to look at and to discuss the reform for global governance. The proposal from Brazil is to look at how multilateral organizations such as the United Nations respond to the contemporary needs, the global needs, whether across a whole range of issues. And so that's the session that we will see this afternoon, when leaders will sit to discuss global governance, all of this ahead of tomorrow's final session to discuss sustainable development and energy transition. There, of course, climate change will be at the very key, at the very heart of those discussions. In the meantime, many bilateral meetings are also taking place, but all of this is building up towards the final statement. And again, the big question is, given the context, the global context going into this leaders summit, the question is, what will the final declaration be, and will there be a global commitment to find the funding to move forward on many of these proposals that have been put forward by Brazil, the hosts?
Joel, we appreciate your reporting this hour. Thank you so much. Joel Richards live in Rio for us. We do have a couple more minutes. Let's get the conversation going with our guests here in the studio. Professor Tricas, as our correspondent was talking just now, a highlight of this morning's proceedings is, of course, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, with the key word being global here. How do you think this alliance will continue a collective fight against poverty and hunger?
Well, I think it's a shame in the 21st century to even talk about poverty, to even talk about hunger. It's not a problem of scarcity. We have the abundance. We have the resources. And so I think this summit demonstrates that there is a political will now. And, you know, the developing world and the global south and the global north coming together to finally end poverty and hunger once and for all. And let me just say, from a Chinese perspective here, in the past 8 years, China declared in 2013 that by 2021 the country would have no extreme poverty, and China accomplished that goal. So I think it's an opportunity, perhaps, for the Chinese side to share the institutional capacity, the experience that it built in those 8 years of significant struggle to eliminate extreme poverty. And I think that's a great opportunity for China to re-engage, not just obviously with the global south, which has always been there, but also with the global north, and invite more cooperation and joint projects with the European Union, with the United States. I know it's a geopolitical world, but I think it would be the best scenario for the U.S. to fight global poverty, because that would, in a sense, slow down the refugee flows to the United States. If you create the opportunities in the global south for people to stay, work, live, and flourish, they don't need to move. They don't need to move to the north. And that's going to be a very good, in a sense, signal for more stability and less populism in Europe and in the United States.
Well, this very issue of poverty and hunger, Professor Liu, is stakes are still high regarding this. And according to UN figures, about 700 million people starved in 2023. It's pretty alarming.
Undernourished.
How could China contribute in the fight against hunger and poverty with China's successful experiences? Could it apply to other countries who wish to have follow their own path?
Well, one is that to maintain security, because if the country is in trouble, torn apart by civil war, by terrorist attacks, no one really wanted to visit over there and spend money. No investors would be interested in it. So actually, many of the Chinese business community leaders, they are very keen to penetrate into some other markets, even with rich resources, labor force, but simply because of the fear of instability of that particular country. And so they are really hesitating. So therefore, to maintain security, and also this is also proposed in the G20 with regard to the global security initiative. So second, they must be receptive of investment and trade. For example, in some of African countries I've visited, unfortunately, they are not really opening to outside investment, or simply they just carve one corner for a foreign investor to manufacture over there. You have to export everything out, and then they had difficulty in facilitating the conversion of different currencies, and there could also be harassment with regard to the charity, forced charity work, and etc. So that's another thing. So that's why how we can really work together to have a coordinated approach in terms of policy as how to bring up trade and investment, because after all, to deal with the elevation of poverty, throwing dimes in a begging bowl doesn't really solve the problem on the root cause. And I always say that China also, proposes, you do not only give fish, but also you give fishing skills. But on top of that, you can really provide more technology for them to process fish so that they can really have a value added. And eventually China is there to open the market to receive those raw fish and also those canned fish. So this is really a whole chain of efforts for development aid. But in the meantime, you do also give the respect to everybody that is in the entire loop.
Great metaphor.
Yeah.
Raw fish and canned fish. That's the first time I heard it. Great metaphor. Thank you.
Well, it remains to be seen how leaders would agree. What could they achieve in concrete terms, both on Monday and Tuesday? We'd like to thank you for your analysis, Professor Liu Baocheng and Professor Vasilis Tikas. Appreciate your insights.
The G20 Summit has officially opened in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro. The group's leaders are set to make speeches across 3 sessions at the event. The main topics of discussion are the fight against hunger and poverty, reforming international institutions, and energy transitions. The group is expected to issue a declaration at the end of the summit.
And CGTN will certainly follow the sessions and various activities on the sidelines. You can also find out more about the summit on our website and social media accounts. I'm Wang Momang in Beijing.
I'm Zheng Xu. Thank you so much for your company.